For those that I haven't met, my name is Carissa Craven. I'm the program coordinator for the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. I've been, helping out Lucia just a little over a year. And I've got an echo. I'm not sure if I'm causing that. We'll
I
get
can't
through.
hear the echo on our side.
I
Okay, it might be
cannot.
my fault. I'll just work through it. Um, so this is a very general overview of the grant overview and planning process at UIS. If you have more specific questions, I am happy to answer them. Raise your hand in the chat, put it in the chat. I've got it pulled up, and hopefully we answer your questions today.
Carissa, to make it easier, I can manage the chat so you can.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And also just a quick thing. We have a whole schedule of workshops for the rest of the semester for IRB and grant writing, and we'll send it out to the campus on Monday. So you guys are aware and start blocking your calendar if you are interested in those topics.
And as a heads up, this is recording. I do have an AI note taker in the chat that will summarize things. I believe it automatically sends things to you at the end, just like a transcription of the minutes. So I know we've kind of introduced ourselves, but the pre-award office is Lucia, myself, Sam, and we have two student workers, Abby and Hannah. And then Charles Alsbury is in post-award, but he has been helping out with a lot of the pre-award processes. And then he also has a new helper. His name is Ollie, and he's been here about a month. So we're really pumping up our staff. So just to start, what is a sponsored program? These include grants, contracts, and collaborative agreements. Today's really going to focus on the grant section. But these are, activities that are sponsored by another entity. They are meant to further the instructional research, public service, or economic development objectives of the university. Typically, not always, these require the return of unspent funds. These will have a defined scope of work, deliverables, a period of performance, and a budget. These will name a project director or principal investigator. There's a financial requirement as well as a programmatic requirement when it comes to reporting. And these require intellectual input to develop, determine, research, or identify a deliverable or result. These definitions help you know if it's actually a sponsored program or if it goes into a different category. For example, a gift goes through a different office than a sponsored program goes through a different office than oh gosh, Lucy, I can't think of the word. What goes through payables? Revenue generating. Revenue generating does not go through our office. So again, this is going to focus on grants at the pre-award stage. So the sponsored programs life cycle really begins with your ideas. Once you know what you want to do, you can start looking for funding. Once you find a funding opportunity that works for you, you can start developing your proposal, pulling documents, asking questions, a lot of back and forth with partners, our office, anyone that's really involved. Once you have things finalized, it'll go through some institutional approvals. Sometimes those can be fast, sometimes those are not necessarily fast. So we do kind of need those final documents pretty far in advance, at least 2 weeks, but as much as you can give us. Then you'll submit it, we'll get everything kosher on our end and the sponsor's end, and hopefully they offer you the funds. And then we will negotiate, make sure the terms are good for you, good for the university, as well as good for the sponsor. Everything is mutually beneficial. And then if that can be, good on both ends, it will be executed by both us and the sponsor. And that kind of is where the pre-award shifts over to post-award. So this is the half that kind of Lucia, Sam, and I work on. And then once it's signed, it goes over to Charles's end. He'll get the account set up. He'll help with management, monitoring, sharing, final report, and closeout. So that's really what post-award is. When it comes to the proposal roles, the development and the internal submission is mostly on the investigators with some assistance from their unit with, the business administrator, anyone that knows what they're doing on that end. The unit in college will also approve the unit head and the dean or director. And then after all of that is good, it comes to the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, which also houses the authorized organizational representative, the people that can officially make agreements on behalf or make proposals on behalf of the university. So our office will review, give the final approvals, will externally submit, and we will negotiate on your behalf and accept on your behalf as well. So the big bulk of this is going to focus on external grants. I do have a section on internal grants at the end as well. The processes are a little different. External definitely has more steps. So when it comes to planning, you want to conceptualize. You don't want to just dive in without an idea of what you're doing. After that, you'll look for funding opportunities. Once you find a handful that might work, you're going to read the guidelines. You're going to read the guidelines again, and you're going to read them a third time. The first is really for an overview. The second time, you're going to look for content if you can provide that. And the third, you're going to look for the really small details like the formatting, the technical aspects. So you really want to have a thorough understanding of those guidelines. That'll tell you if you're even eligible, if it's worth your time. It'll tell you the deadlines, if you have time to develop everything, how much money they're offering, how much is coming out for indirect costs. Those guidelines are going to be your lifeline and ours as well. Once you've decided what opportunity you want to pursue, you're going to notify your unit as well as us. You could let us know 5 months, 6 months in advance. This is not a contract. This is not requiring you to submit. You're not penalized for changing your minds. It just helps it get us on our radar and know what's going on. And then the bulk of your work is the planning and development. And once that is pretty well finalized, you'll submit internally. We'll communicate back and forth if anything is not meeting those guidelines, if there was a different interpretation. And if everything is good, we will do a final review. Your unit will review, make sure you're not promising, 100% of your effort, and they won't have you to be a faculty member. And then final approval will happen and it will be submitted externally. And then hopefully that final step is you win. So at the conceptualization stage, you need to know what you're looking for. Ideally, you have a topic or you already have a full-fledged idea. It won't always align with what funders are looking for, so there might have to be tweaks. Be open to those possibilities. But having a handful of key search terms or specific sponsor criteria, can help you narrow it down. If you have a $100,000 idea, you probably don't want to be looking for $1,000 grants. If you want to specifically do research internationally, you're not going to be looking for domestic sponsors necessarily. Just be aware if you are too narrow in your ideas, that can limit the opportunities. So once you know what you're looking for, you can see what funders match. And just a little plug for Grant Forward, since there is another training this afternoon with the Grant Forward staff. This is a database that has thousands of opportunities. You can make your own profile. We can send what we think the campus wants, but you can get alerts for what you specifically want. And that is at 1 o'clock. If you saw this link, you probably also saw that link, but it's really about curating your searches. So these include federal agencies, state agencies, a bunch of different foundations, public, private, corporate. It's tens of thousands of opportunities. So as an example, if you go in with no idea of what you want, you're going to get about 90,000 results that are open as of 3 o'clock yesterday. I don't want to wade through 90,000. So if I have 3 search terms that I want, my previous lifetime, I was in the elementary STEM education field, both formal and informal education. So if I am looking for anything in STEM, anything in education, anything elementary, I get about 32,000 results, and it defaults to US dollars. That's still more than I want to wade through. So if I have, more restrictions, if I want a deadline after October, so I have plenty of time to develop it, I want at least $5,000, specifically a research project with eligibility in Illinois and organizationally, because, we're in a university, we can't really submit on behalf of individuals, we submit for the university. So I really wanted to narrow that down. I have 530 results, probably more than I want to wade through, but it's a lot better than 90,000. But if I really want to narrow it down, I just want STEM education elementary. I can say I only want those words and it has to have all of those words. I have 7 results. So once I looked through those results, let's see if I'm getting ahead of myself. I wanted to look at the sponsor listings. So I have 7 to go through. I can see if any, spark my interest. And when I looked at them, the first 5 were only eligible for tribal colleges and universities. So my 7 really became 2. And both of them were for NSF. And one is due in January and one is due next August. So I can really look at these, decide which is more realistic. One is informal, one is about teacher development, things I have experience in both, but I can decide which one better works for what I want to do. So I would go and look at the guidelines, look at what the sponsor expects. Do my goals even match what their goals are? So, like I said, read the guidelines, read the guidelines, read the guidelines.
Mm.
Because there are a lot of things you are looking for to know what the better fit is. You want to know, is UIS even eligible? Sometimes it's only eligible for an R1 institution. UIS is an emerging research institution. We are not R1 or R2. So we would be looking for things that are open to all institutions of higher education, PUIs, ERIs, things, we can apply for without getting rejected right off the bat. Sometimes you may not be an eligible PI. Some are specifically for new faculty. Some are specifically for experienced faculty. Sometimes you have to have a degree in a certain field. You need to know what experience is required. Every once in a while, you get a foundation that wants you to be a member. And if you're not a member, you can't apply. So very first thing is looking at eligibility. Make sure your ideas align with the program, the priorities, the goals, what the sponsor wants. As amazing as free money is, it's not necessarily no strings attached. You want to make sure that what you want matches what the funder wants, and you're not going to be clashing if you were awarded. Sometimes there's more than one document. With those 2 NSF documents, I'm going to get the solicitation that's probably about 35 pages, but every NSF, proposal you're going to write also has a 200-page policy and procedure guide that you need to be familiar with. So we can help you out with that. So you don't have to read 250 pages right off the bat. And sometimes there's frequently asked questions that maybe weren't necessarily explained in the solicitation. So they're really clarifying things to make sure your interpretation matches their expectations. Sometimes a meeting is required or recommended. Are they offering enough money? If they're taking 41.2% for indirect costs, you have to be aware of how much money you realistically have to work with. Do you have enough money to pay people to get the supplies you need, to go to conferences if those are required? Sometimes they require the university to commit a match. Sometimes they prohibit a match. So you really need to know what they're expecting. And if you do have to commit university resources, is the university benefiting or are they losing money? Is this a bad deal for them? Again, more guidelines. There's so many always. Do you have time before the deadline? Sometimes sponsors don't give you a lot of time or you just didn't see it, but you really do want to submit a quality document, not just a lot of them. There are approvals you have to get at the unit level, at the college or center level, as well as at the university level. If you're collaborating with other institutions, they also have to have approvals and processes they follow. They may have different policies. Often these overlap, but sometimes they contradict. So we have to decide which policy we need to follow, or is there a way to make them mesh? And then, if they're big institutions and they have to get a president's signature, that can take a while to get that through their queue. And then really, do they have enough time to develop those documents as well? And then what is the sponsor asking for? Sometimes these are very broad items, and sometimes they are very small, seemingly small things that could get you rejected without even a glance at your documents that you spent months working on. So pay attention to, is there a minimum effort? Is there maximum effort? Some sponsors will require 50% of your annual time. Some will say no more than 10%. So make sure you have the time in your schedule to commit that level each year. Are there multiple steps? Some sponsors will have you submit one page in one portal 2 weeks before the entire application is due in a totally separate portal. You have to make sure you've got an account in both. And sometimes our office has to approve it. Sometimes their office has to approve it. Things take time. Formatting seems like the smallest thing, but things will get rejected if you use the wrong font, if you have the wrong spacing between lines, if you have the wrong font size, if you didn't include a heading on its own line. These are things that can be an immediate rejection, as silly as they seem. So make sure you're paying attention to those formatting specifications. Are there specific attachments? Are there templates you have to use? Do they require a collaboration? Do they prohibit a collaboration? Do they require cost share? Do they prohibit? All sponsors have different needs, different requirements. Some require a mentorship, some don't allow a mentorship. Some require conference travel that you have to have in your budget. Lots of different things. So once you've kind of skimmed the guidelines, you want to narrow it down to one really well-matched opportunity. And you want it to be the best fit. So these are usually competitive grants. If you submit 10, we say that about 20% of federal grants get sponsored. That doesn't mean if you submit 10, 2 are going to be funded. That means somewhere 2 out of every 10 really quality competitive grants are going to be funded. So if you have one really good one, you have a better chance than if you just submit 10 you slap together. Ask for what you need, ask for what you'll use, but also be realistic. Just because they offer $1 million doesn't mean you can use $1 million. If you can use it, absolutely budget for it. But if you're going to have to return or not draw down $500,000, that doesn't reflect well on you as a budgeter. It doesn't reflect on us as a university. It just says either we don't know how to plan or we don't know how to spend. So make sure, ask for what you will use. Again, if you can't spend it, it doesn't look good. And then don't commit what you can't, commit to. If it's not realistic to average 20 hours a week for either a 9-month contract or a 12-month contract, don't put 50% effort. Especially if you're applying for multiple grants, you can't offer more than 100%. And you also have other responsibilities that you have to the university. So after you've decided, you've started looking around, you started contacting, your unit needs to know, and we need to know. And the way to kind of initiate that conversation is to go into my proposals. I know it's not everyone's favorite. We try to help you guys through that just because we know it's not always intuitive, especially the very first time. The BAAs for your unit, most of them have been trained. If they have not, we are more than happy to train them so that they can support you as well. But just entering the basic information when you're considering it helps us plan. So at conceptualization, you don't have to enter everything because you don't have everything. But you should know, what type of proposal is it? Is it new? Is it a renewal? Are you asking for an amendment? If it's a letter of intent that requires institutional approval, it would be a pre-proposal. There's several different types that you can put in, but typically it's just new. You need to know who the lead unit is. And this is the only thing that you can't change once you hit save. If you start working and the type of proposal changes, the personnel changes, if anything else changes, you can edit. The lead unit is the only one you can't. The activity type, let us know, is it sponsored research? Is it a fellowship? Is it a clinical trial? If the other options don't fit, you can put it's an other sponsored activity. The proposed project dates, when you think it'll start if you get funded, when you think it'll end if you get funded. This may not necessarily be what the sponsor actually funds, but it gives us an idea of what we can expect and how much we need to escalate salary as well. The project title, again, this can change up until you submit, but it does have a 200 character limit, which matches a lot of federal sponsors. We need to know who the sponsor is. And if we are the subaward, we would also need to know where the funds originate, which is called the prime sponsor. So we just know who's sending us the money and who's sending them the money. The big one, this is what I pull reports from, is the deadline date. Ideally, you also know the time. Some sponsors are, 11:59 Eastern time. Some are 5 p.m., whatever the institution's local time is. Some are noon. It really helps us know, when we have to if we're working down to the wire. The opportunity number helps us look up any frequently asked questions, any additional policies, any updates. And you uploading those solicitation or guidelines also helps us create a checklist of sorts. So this is something we're instituting, fiscal year 25. We want to help you by developing a checklist as soon as we know that you are searching for something. That helps you know all the little nitty gritties. If we have experience with a specific sponsor, we can let you know the ins and outs essentially. And if it is a very complex submission, we will more than likely request a meeting with you, any of your collaborators, as well as the business administrative associate to go over the requirements so that nothing is missed and rejected before they can even look at it. All right, and I know my proposals usually has questions. Is there anything I can answer at this point? So if you do think of anything, feel free to email me personally, the ORA account, anything you need help with, because again, I know my proposals is not the fun part of grants. So we do encourage collaboration. We do want to communicate with those grant offices in case they have different policies from ours or different timelines than ours. So if we are the lead institution, we are called a pass-through entity. All the money comes to us, and then we would send the check out. And then we are also responsible for the oversight of the money that is spent by the other institution. So because we need documents 2 weeks in advance, they also need time to get it to their institution, organization, whoever signs things off for them. So if it's a R1 university, they may have a smaller turnaround. It may be they just need 4 extra days. So they would need 2 weeks plus 4 days. In extreme cases, some universities require a month because they just don't do a lot of grants. It's not their office's priority. So they would need 2 weeks plus a month so they can go through their processes, approve it, and then get it to us. So a lot of intricacies to work through, and us facilitating those conversations with the grant offices takes a little bit off of you as the investigator for our campus. So after all the fun, paperwork side, you get to develop the documents and the ideas, which does take time. Some grants are much more simple. It does not necessarily take months and months to develop, but some really do. You may end up with a 75, 100-page, a 300-page document in extreme cases. So you really want to develop everything that we expect to see and everything the sponsor expects to see. They do not want blank or missed sections. So even if a sponsor doesn't require these 3 items, UIS requires at minimum a scope of work, an internal budget that shows the calculations and the base rates, and then a justification. Most sponsors will already require this, so you don't have to do it twice if it's already in the full proposal. The big difference would be the budget because most sponsors don't ask for an Excel spreadsheet with the calculations. But then we also need everything else the sponsor requires. So that can be submitted as a full proposal if you have the final documents at least 2 weeks in advance. If you finish the budget first, send that to us first, put it in my proposal first, and just let us know it's in there. We can review in pieces. And then creating your own milestones and deadlines along the way really helps you keep on track so you're not scrambling at the last second. And we can help
Watch it. Game changer.
So sometimes your collaborators also need some parameters. They need some assistance knowing what they need to turn in. The non-lead institution does not always have the exact same documents required. So again, even if the sponsor doesn't require it, what we need to see to, check risk and compliance ability is a scope of work for each collaborator, a budget for each organization. If there's just one sub-award, we would just need one for that office. If there are multiple, we need one for each organization. And then they would each also submit a justification for each of those budgets. And then the additional piece is a signed institutional letter of commitment. Because universities are the stewards of the work, the university has to make the commitment as well as the investigator. So if the investigator says, oh, I'm offering up 20% of my institutional time, the institution needs to say, yes, they can use or they can offer 20% of their time. So it's just a letter that says they've reviewed it, they've approved it, they are good with what is being proposed. And there are different components that can go into that letter. We will also require what the sponsor does. And depending on the level of risk, we may need a signed confirmation of their internal controls and how they monitor. We may need their current indirect cost rate agreement if we cannot find that easily online, or if it requires a login, they'll just have to send us a copy. We may need a link to their most recent audit to see if there are a lot of findings regarding compliance. Yes, I am planning on sending out the slides. And often we may ask for the biographical sketches, resumes, CVs, because the sponsor asks for them, but we may also do it to assess if they have the experience to carry out the scope of work. And then anything else that would be required. So this can vary from organization to organization, and that's why we do that communication piece with the grant offices. And just as a note, we cannot approve the other institution's documents. The only time we would ask for revisions is if there's a huge discrepancy as we're uploading it that we notice, but it's really their office's jurisdiction to approve and follow the policies since we don't know every institution's requirements. It always helps to have other people look at your documents. Sometimes we're so in our work, we don't notice the tiniest things. So we don't expect you to do the work in a silo. You have colleagues who understand the science. You have colleagues who don't understand the science. They can look for grammar. They can look for comprehension. They can tell you if a non-scientific reviewer knows what you're talking about. My experience comes from elementary education. I worked with 10-year-olds. I am not necessarily an expert on artificial intelligence or authentication, but I can still review those and make sure they make sense to a non-scientific reviewer. We are here to help. As long as we have time, we can double check a budget. We can make sure you haven't missed an important section in your document. Obviously, we're going to check these at the final review stage anyway, but we can do it beforehand. We have a grant writer. So once that system is put in place, you might be able to check her availability for assistance since she is more on the development side, and do it way in advance because I know her schedule is going to fill up once that is open. We support that pursuit of scholarship. We want to say yes to your grants. We want to get you money. So we have those resources available for the development and compliance sides of grants. And speaking of compliance, sometimes there are extra steps depending on the sponsor. Some require them to be initiated before you submit. Some require them to be finalized before you submit. So again, knowing those guidelines, I'm going to keep coming back to that, will let you know what you need to spend time on. If it does not need to be initiated, spend your time on the grant after you submit, initiate the process. If it needs approved, definitely make sure you've got that process done before you submit. So when I talk about compliance, I am talking about human research subjects. An IRB approval or pending document may be required. If you are using animal subjects, you may need to go through an institutional care committee for the use of animals. If you are using biologic or chemical materials, you may have to go through a biosafety committee. If you are collaborating with a family member, this is not a disqualification, but it may require an additional disclosure for potential conflict of interest. If you have stock ownership or some other financial relationship with a sponsor, if you've consulted for them, this is a potential financial conflict of interest. It may need a management plan. It may need certain checks and balances along the way. It's just an additional compliance document that might be required. If you are planning on working internationally or working with non-US citizens, there may be export control requirements. There might need to be a visual compliance check. There might need to be additional licenses, and some of the licenses can take months. So that really needs to be identified ahead of time if that process needs to be followed. And then hopefully you're done for the most part, and you can submit for internal review and approval. You know, best case scenario, it's perfect and beautiful, and we don't need the whole 2 weeks. However, sometimes there's limited submissions, and we have 5 people that want to submit, and the sponsor only accepts 1. Sometimes there's cost share, and it's at the university level, so we need chancellor approval. Those more complicated requirements might need more than 2 weeks, so knowing those ahead of time, getting those initiated increases chances for success. So once it's submitted, the process is, for the most part, done. The principal investigator, the co-PIs, any other key personnel will confirm information is accurate and they have consented to appear on the proposal. Don't just put somebody's name on it because they're an expert. They do have to confirm that they have agreed to be on this. Unit heads and deans and directors will make sure it aligns with the mission. They confirm commitments of space, resources. If you are saying you're giving 50% of your time, or if you are requesting a potential course buyout, they really need to approve that and say that they can afford to have you give up a class, and they will take on hiring an adjunct for that course or shifting it to someone else's, commitments. And then if there's cost share, they have to make sure they're willing to give that on your behalf. And then after certifications and approvals happen, we'll do final compliance checks, and we in our office grant institutional approval. And then some sponsors require even more signatures, and we will route those documents on your behalf. And we don't like to say no, like I said earlier. So if we do get things in less than 10 full business days, 2 weeks, we will do our best to review. We will do our best to submit, but we really can't make those guarantees, especially if it's a really heavy deadline where we've got 10, 20, 30 proposals, and half of them gave them on time and half didn't. So we're really scrambling to review. So we will try to submit. They might be without review. They might get administratively rejected if we have not had time to fully review everything, which we don't want to happen. And then another big one is once it's approved, the campus policy is that our office does have to submit on the unit's behalf unless a specific deviation has been approved in advance. So there are instances where the unit has a better relationship with the sponsor. They should be submitting. That's fine if it's requested and approved in advance. In some cases, a consultant is hired and the consultant has been given authorized access. That has to be approved at the chancellor level. So if it's approved, it can be done. But 9 times out of 10, we do have to be the ones that submit for you. We are the only ones that have authority for the institution to make that promise. It's essentially a contractual agreement that we have to make sure meets policies. We do try not to submit things the day it's due if we can avoid it. Too often websites crash due to increased traffic. There may be other technical issues. If there is a compliance issue, that may take some time to sort out. Sometimes we think we have a good file and for whatever reason it got corrupted and we have to figure out how to get it into an acceptable format. These things do happen, but we try to catch that before the last second. And I think I have this on the wrong slide, but this is just the policy stating that our office is required to submit, that there is a section about those deferred approvals. So we do want to decrease risk when it comes to chances that we can't accept the money. So if things are submitted without the proper signatures, proper approvals, the terms and conditions may be incompatible with what the university can allow, so they may need to be renegotiated. Sometimes renegotiations are quick, and sometimes there's a lot of back and forth, and agreements are really hard to come to. Sometimes a wrong rate was used or a wrong salary was entered. So amendments have to be requested before documents can be signed. And this doesn't happen very often, but in extreme cases, the university and sponsor are completely incompatible. They're not willing to renegotiate on one side or the other, and that can cause the award to be rejected. So if we don't have time to look at it beforehand, that does increase the risk of that. And we try to avoid it in every instance we can, but sometimes it is unavoidable. And we don't want to take away that time or those funds from your work, from your collaborators' work, from our work. That's a lot of time wasted as well as a lot of money wasted. And nobody gets happy over having to reject, $1 million, $100,000, $50,000, even $1,000. You don't want to reject if it's, for you. So just give us time, communicate frequently, and we can try to get you your money. So with the external grants, how do I do on time? All right, are there any questions on external grants before I go into the internal, which is much less heavy? If any pop up, feel free to put them in the chat. I know Lucy is monitoring that. So internal grants do not go through that same process, because it's our office that's, duplicating your efforts, it's duplicating locations for us. So they do not have to go through my proposals if they are originating on the UIS campus. So a majority of the grants have web tool forms. Some will ask you to submit directly to ORA. Some will ask you to email it to a committee chair or a director for that section. So each of those will vary, again, based on the guidelines, but they are much shorter guidelines for internal awards. So U of I system level proposals, such as those coming from the Discovery Partners Institute and those coming from the Illinois Innovation Network, while technically the funds are internal, they are not coming from our office, so they do still need to go through the review process because they're not originating at the campus level. So they're not external, but they will go through external processes. It's a little confusing with those couple of sponsors. But some of those that are coming up are the Berman Sabbatical Fund. That deadline is December, but that is for faculty members who are applying for sabbatical. It's just some supplemental funding to assist with those expenses. And again, I will send out these slides. The information is linked. The ones that are open, it is to the ones for academic year 25. The ones that have not opened yet, it has last year's request for proposals, which should be very similar to what the upcoming deadlines will be. The presentation support program, excuse me, used to be 2 different programs. Now they are combined. If you are a tenured or tenure track faculty member and you have been selected to present a peer-reviewed work, then you can request funds that can be applied toward registration for the conference, travel-related expenses, transportation, lodging, per diem. As long as you have a qualified application, it is a first come, first serve until the funds are exhausted. If you are presenting domestically, that is $600 max once per fiscal year. And then if you are presenting internationally, you can request a supplemental $800. And back to that presentation fund. So that is on a rolling basis, but we do have some deadlines just to get, milestones along the way. The Competitive Scholarly Research Grant Program provides support for just engaging in scholarly and creative research in your field. It is not yet open for this academic year, but you can look at the old guidelines and start preparing in advance. That deadline has been historically in March to give you an idea of when that will be closing. The Moy Endowed Fund is for collaborative research with SIU School of Medicine faculty, and it is specifically projects in the biomedical or healthcare field and does require at least one faculty from our campus and one faculty from the School of Medicine. And that deadline is historically in February or March, usually a pre-review in February, and then the optional pre-review in February, and then the final deadline in March. And then if you have not successfully applied for many grants, or if you would like to pursue a mentorship in grant writing, the grant writing mentorship program is available, and you would select a mentor and they would help you with the writing of a larger external grant. And historically, that deadline has been in April. There are also some internal awards available for students. So if you want to encourage students to look for some funding for their own research, the student research funds are available that can support data collection or presenting findings at professional venues. It does require a college match of at least 25%. And if the student is only attending a conference, but they're not presenting, that is not an eligible expense. There are no deadlines, but this is first come, first serve, and it is competitive. It's not necessarily the most qualified get it. They will go to review, and those that have merit more than likely will be funded. But again, it is limited, so we encourage it as early in the academic year as possible. The Floyd Public Policy Research Scholarship is available for graduate students who are working on projects that can lead to better policy decisions in Illinois. That is not limited to a certain academic department as long as it relates to Illinois and public policy. And then for prior master's students, faculty are able to nominate students for the Outstanding Thesis or Project Award Program. And that deadline is coming up fairly soon. If you want to, when I send this out, click that link and see if you have an eligible student. They can be nominated for that, and then they have the option to present at the research symposium in the spring. And there are a couple of internal awards that are not sponsored through our office, but if you want to be aware of them, there's a system one that is for students who are doing research in diversity and are presenting at a conference. That is available through the system office of the vice president. And that deadline is coming up in about a month. And then if you want to work with a student and you are working on a project based in or inspired by the Imaquan Preserve, there are some collaborative grants available through the Thurkeldson Field Station. And just a reminder of the contacts. There are several people available to help you and direct you and guide you in anything you need when it comes to sponsored programs. And that leaves about 15 minutes for questions if needed.